The sound of the tent collapsing was almost gentle compared to the sound of Claire Whitmore's heart breaking. One moment, she was standing beneath a pale afternoon sky, struggling to secure the final rope to a wooden stake. The next, the entire canvas structure folded over her like a defeated flag, burying her beneath poles, rain covers, and the last fragile pieces of confidence she had carried into the mountains. When Reid Callahan pulled the fabric away, he expected anger, embarrassment, or tears. Instead, Claire looked up at him with rainwater shining on her cheeks, forced a trembling smile, and whispered, "Maybe we could share yours tonight." Reid did not know then that she was not afraid of losing her tent. She was afraid that she had already lost everything else. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes the smallest act of compassion becomes the shelter that saves a person's life. The charity camping trip had been organized for families grieving the loss of loved ones, though neither Claire nor Reid had come because they wanted help. Claire had volunteered as a photographer, insisting she was there only to document the event for the foundation. Reid had agreed to guide the hiking group because the organizer, his older sister Meredith, had begged him to participate. Both of them had perfected the same lonely skill, standing close enough to pain to help others while never admitting how badly they were hurting themselves. Claire had lost her younger brother, Grant, in a car accident 18 months earlier. She had been driving. Reid had lost his wife, Elise, to a sudden heart condition 3 years before. He had not been there when she collapsed because they had argued that morning, and he had left the house before she finished speaking. Their grief was different, but guilt had carved the same hollow space inside them. The mountain meadow was bright despite the gathering clouds, filled with yellow wildflowers, silver-green grass, and the distant laughter of children helping their parents arrange sleeping bags beneath open canopies. The overnight camp had not yet begun, and the afternoon activities were still underway, but Claire's broken tent had immediately drawn attention. She hated being watched. She hated how quickly strangers rushed to help, because kindness made it harder to pretend she did not need anyone. Reid calmly waved the others back and knelt beside the snapped support pole. The metal had split near the center, making the tent impossible to repair without equipment they did not have. Claire crouched beside him, rubbing her hands together as though she could erase the mistake. She apologized repeatedly, claiming she must have assembled it incorrectly, but Reid noticed that the pole had been damaged long before she arrived. It had been wrapped in clear tape, carefully hidden inside the carrying bag. Someone had known it was broken. Claire admitted the tent had belonged to Grant. He had bought it for a trip they had planned but never taken. After his death, she had found it in the back of his closet, still smelling faintly of pine soap and the peppermint gum he always carried. She had brought it because she thought sleeping beneath the same canvas he had once touched might make her feel close to him. Instead, it had collapsed the way every hopeful thing in her life seemed to collapse. Reid listened without interrupting. When she finished, he did not offer an empty promise that everything happened for a reason. He simply told her that broken things were not always signs to turn back. Sometimes they were invitations to stop pretending we could carry everything alone. His words struck her harder than sympathy would have. Claire stared across the meadow, blinking rapidly as sunlight broke through the clouds and illuminated families walking together along the trail. Reid's tent was large enough for 2 people, with a separate divider and enough space to preserve privacy. Meredith also offered Claire a place inside the women's supply shelter, but Claire surprised herself by refusing. She told everyone she would share Reid's tent if he truly did not mind. The arrangement remained innocent and practical, yet the decision stirred something uncomfortable in both of them. Reid had not shared a private space with anyone since Elise died. Claire had avoided emotional closeness because she believed anyone who loved her would eventually suffer. Still, the tent represented more than a place to sleep after the daytime program ended. It represented trust, and neither of them had practiced trust in years. Throughout the afternoon, Reid led the group toward a shallow river where participants were invited to write the names of the people they had lost on smooth stones. The children decorated theirs with colorful markers. Adults held their stones silently, some pressing them to their hearts before placing them near the water. Claire moved among the families with her camera, capturing embraces, tears, and quiet smiles. But when she saw a teenage boy write his sister's name, her hands began to shake so violently that she nearly dropped the camera. Reid noticed from across the riverbank. He left the group with Meredith and approached without drawing attention. Claire insisted she was fine, but Reid gently asked why she had not written Grant's name. Her expression hardened. She said the activity was for people who deserved to grieve, not people responsible for the death they were grieving. For the first time, she told him what happened. Grant had called her from a roadside restaurant after his friend abandoned him during an argument. Claire had been exhausted after working a double shift, but she drove nearly an hour to pick him up. On the return journey, Grant teased her about being overprotective. She looked toward him for only a second, laughing despite herself. When she turned back, a deer stood in the road. Claire swerved. The car struck a barrier and rolled down an embankment. She survived with a fractured shoulder. Grant died before the ambulance arrived. Her parents never blamed her, but she saw the silence in their faces. She interpreted every pause as accusation and every act of forgiveness as pity. She eventually stopped visiting them because their love felt unbearable. Reid sat beside her on a sun-warmed boulder and told her about his last morning with Elise. They had argued over something so ordinary that he could barely remember how it began. She wanted him to cancel a work trip because she had been experiencing dizziness. Reid believed she was anxious and accused her of trying to control his schedule. He left angry, ignoring her call 15 minutes later. By the time he listened to her voicemail, a neighbor had already found her unconscious. The doctors said even immediate help might not have saved her, but Reid built his life around those two words, might not. Claire realized he had been punishing himself with uncertainty just as she had been punishing herself with certainty. She had decided she was guilty because guilt gave the tragedy a clear explanation. Accepting that accidents happened meant admitting life could take someone without permission, warning, or fairness. That truth frightened her more than blame. The clouds moved away as the group returned to the meadow, and the afternoon became unexpectedly golden. Children flew paper kites while adults prepared a communal meal beneath the open pavilion. Claire photographed a father helping his daughter untangle a string, then lowered the camera when she noticed an older couple holding hands near the wildflowers. For months, she had believed love was dangerous because loss always followed it. Yet looking around, she began to understand that grief did not prove love had been a mistake. Grief proved love had existed. Reid stood nearby, watching her expression change. He did not ask what she was thinking. He simply handed her a small gray stone and a marker. Claire carried the stone back to the river alone. Reid followed at a respectful distance but remained several steps behind. She wrote Grant's name slowly, each letter uneven because her fingers trembled. Beneath it, she added the words, "I am sorry I survived without knowing how to live." She knelt near the edge, but before placing the stone down, she remembered something Grant had said after she once apologized for missing his birthday dinner. He had laughed and told her she spent too much time apologizing for loving people imperfectly. The memory did not arrive like a wound. It arrived like his hand reaching through the years to pull her back toward herself. Instead of leaving the stone beside the river, Claire turned and carried it to Reid. She said she wanted to keep it until she could face her parents. She had avoided them for nearly a year, answering only occasional messages and mailing gifts on holidays because she was afraid of seeing Grant's absence in their home. Reid told her courage was not the absence of guilt or fear. Courage was deciding that love deserved a place beside them. Claire asked whether he had ever listened to Elise's final voicemail. Reid admitted he had not. He kept it saved but could never press play. Claire did not pressure him, yet her honesty made him realize he had been asking her to confront a past he still refused to face. They returned to the campsite while the sun remained high above the western ridge. Reid sat near the collapsed tent with his phone in his hand. Claire stayed beside him, not touching him, not speaking, simply offering the quiet presence he had given her. He finally opened the voicemail. Elise's voice was faint but calm. She was not calling to continue the argument. She said she was sorry, asked him to travel safely, and reminded him that she loved him even when they were stubborn with each other. Reid folded forward as though the words had struck him physically. For 3 years, he had imagined anger in her last message. He had believed her final thoughts were filled with disappointment. Instead, her final gift had been forgiveness. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. Reid cried without trying to hide it, and for the first time since Elise's death, the tears did not feel like punishment. They felt like release. When he looked up, Claire was crying too. Neither mistook the moment for romance, though something tender had begun growing between them. It was not the desperate closeness of two lonely people trying to replace those they had lost. It was recognition. They saw each other clearly, including the guilt, fear, and unfinished grief, and neither turned away. Later that afternoon, Meredith found a spare family tent in the equipment truck. It was clean, sturdy, and large enough for Claire to use alone. She carried it across the meadow with 2 volunteers, expecting Claire to be relieved. Instead, Claire looked at Reid's tent, then at the replacement, and smiled. She accepted the spare tent, because she understood that healing did not require creating dependence. Sharing Reid's shelter had been offered as kindness, but choosing her own shelter became an act of strength. Reid helped her assemble it, checking every pole and rope. This time, Claire drove the final stake into the ground herself. As they worked, she admitted that when she had suggested sharing his tent, she had not been flirting. She had been terrified of being alone with Grant's memories. Reid said he knew. Claire then confessed that part of her had hoped someone would tell her she did not deserve to be alone. Reid gently replied that deserving had nothing to do with it. People needed each other not because they were weak, guilty, or broken, but because being human was never meant to be a solitary task. Before the afternoon program ended, Claire called her parents. Her mother answered on the first ring. Claire could not speak for several seconds, and then every prepared sentence disappeared. She simply said she missed them and wanted to come home. Her mother began crying. There was no accusation, no demand for explanation, only relief. Claire learned that her father still set a place for her during Sunday lunch, hoping each week might be the week she returned. They had never been waiting for an apology. They had been waiting for their daughter. Reid made a call too. He contacted Elise's sister, whom he had avoided because seeing her reminded him of the funeral. He apologized for disappearing and asked whether they could meet to talk about Elise, not only about how she died but about how she lived. Her sister agreed immediately. Reid had spent years treating Elise's memory like a locked room filled with pain. Now he was ready to open the door and let the light in. As the sun lowered but the day remained bright, the group gathered for one final activity. Each participant was asked to share one thing they planned to carry forward. Claire stood with Grant's stone in her hand and said she would carry love without using guilt as proof that it mattered. Reid said he would carry forgiveness, including the forgiveness he had denied himself. Around them, strangers nodded, cried, and held one another. Pain had brought them into the meadow, but pain was no longer the only thing connecting them. Months later, Claire returned to the same mountain during another daytime charity event, this time as an official volunteer coordinator. Reid came as a guide again. They had remained in each other's lives, first through occasional messages, then through coffee meetings, family visits, and long walks beneath open skies. Their relationship grew slowly, without promises to erase the past. Claire met Elise's sister and listened to stories about the woman Reid would always love. Reid visited Claire's parents and stood beside Grant's photograph without fear. They learned that new love did not betray old love. The heart did not replace people. It made room. Near the river, Claire finally placed Grant's stone beneath a young cedar tree. She no longer needed to carry it as evidence of her sorrow. Reid stood beside her as she whispered goodbye, not because she was leaving her brother behind, but because she was choosing to move forward with him differently. Then she looked toward the meadow where her old tent had once fallen and laughed softly. That collapsing tent had seemed like one more cruel loss. Instead, it had forced her to accept shelter, speak the truth, call her family, and discover that her life was still capable of becoming something beautiful. Before we reach the end, please leave a meaningful comment about someone whose forgiveness, kindness, or presence helped you through a painful season. Your words may remind another person that they are not alone. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Claire slipped her hand into Reid's as the afternoon sun warmed the river stones beneath their feet. There was no dramatic promise that they would never hurt again. They both knew life could change without warning. But they also knew fear was not a reason to refuse happiness. Sometimes a shelter collapses so we will finally look up and see the person standing beside us. Sometimes forgiveness arrives in a voicemail, a phone call, or a hand offered beside a river. And sometimes the moment we believe everything has fallen apart becomes the very moment our life begins rebuilding itself.